I woke up cold. The sensation of metal biting into my wrist, dragging me into a disorienting reality. My eyes fluttered open, and I squinted against the faint light streaming through the blinds. The air was thick with the scent of stale beer and something else, shame, maybe a regret. I tried to move, but the rattling sound of metal made my stomach drop. I was handcuffed and naked. Panic set in as I struggled against the cuffs, my heart pounding like a war drum. The room was unfamiliar. A cheap motel, judging by the peeling wallpaper and stained carpet. How the hell did I get here? Fragments of the previous night came rushing back. The argument with Katie, my wife of 10 years. The way her voice had trembled when I asked why she'd been so distant lately. The look on her face when I mentioned her late nights at the gym. I'd left the house in a storm of anger, heading to the bar to drown my suspicions. After that, everything was a blur. My head throbbed as I tried to piece it together. Who had brought me here? And why? The sound of the door unlocking jolted me out of my thoughts. A man stepped inside, his face unfamiliar, but his posture casual, as if he did this sort of thing all the time. "Morning," he said, smirking. "Who the hell are you?" I demanded, my voice raw. "Let's just say I'm the guy who's been paid to teach you a lesson," he said, his smirk widening. His words sent a chill down my spine. "A lesson?" I repeated, my voice trembling. "What are you talking about?" The man shrugged, pulling a key from his pocket and tossing it onto the bed. "Ask your wife," he said simply. Then he walked out, leaving the door ajar. I stared at the key, my mind racing. What had Katie done? Or, more importantly, what had I done to deserve this? As I freed myself and dressed in the clothes scattered across the floor, one thought consumed me. I needed answers, and I wasn't leaving without them. The drive home was a blur. My head pounded, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The man's words replayed in my mind, each one laced with a venom I couldn't shake. Ask your wife. What had Katie done? Or worse, what had she told him? The possibilities churned in my stomach like acid, each one more damning than the last. The sun was just starting to rise as I pulled into the driveway. Our house looked the same as it always did, calm, serene, like the chaos of the night before had never touched it. But I knew better. I stepped inside, the faint aroma of coffee hitting me like a punch to the gut. Katie always made coffee early, her routine as predictable as the sunrise. But today, the scent felt different, like a cruel joke. I found her in the kitchen, her back to me, as she poured herself a cup. She was dressed in her usual morning workout clothes, her blonde hair tied in a messy bun. To anyone else, she might have looked like the perfect picture of domestic bliss. But to me, she looked like a stranger. "Katie," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet. She froze, the coffee pot still in her hand. Then she turned slowly, her face a mix of surprise and something else, guilt maybe. "Oh," she said softly. "You're back." Her casual tone made my blood boil. "Yeah," I said, my voice sharp. "I'm back. Want to tell me why I woke up handcuffed in a motel room?" Katie's eyes widened, her grip tightening on the coffee pot. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered. "Don't lie to me," I snapped, stepping closer. "Some guy told me to ask my wife. Said it was a lesson." "What kind of lesson, Katie?" Her face paled, and for a moment, she said nothing. Then she set the coffee pot down carefully, her hands trembling. "Matthew," she said, her voice soft. "It's not what you think." "Then what the hell is it?" I demanded. Katie hesitated, her gaze darting toward the floor. I was angry," she admitted finally. "After our fight last night, I called someone. I needed to blow off steam." Her words hit me like a slap. "You called someone?" I repeated, my voice trembling with anger. "Who? And why the hell would you do that?" She didn't answer, her silence cutting deeper than any confession could have. I took a step back, my chest tightening as the pieces started to fall into place. Katie had been distant for weeks, her late nights at the gym becoming more frequent, her phone glued to her hand like a lifeline. And now this? Who is he? I asked, my voice low and dangerous. Katie looked up sharply, her eyes wide with shock. "What?" "Don't play dumb," I said, my fists clenching at my sides. "You've been hiding something, Katie, and I'm done pretending I don't see it." Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I thought she might come clean. But instead, she shook her head, her voice trembling. "You're being paranoid," she said softly. "There's nothing going on." Her denial only fueled my anger. "Then explain the man in the motel," I snapped. "Explain the handcuffs, the cryptic messages, the late nights. Explain why you're acting like a stranger in our own home." Katie's tears spilled over, her voice breaking as she replied. "Matthew, I'm sorry," she said. "But I can't do this right now." She turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the kitchen, my chest tight with rage and confusion. Her apology felt hollow, like a door slamming shut in my face. I stared after her, my mind racing. If Katie wasn't going to tell me the truth, I'd have to find it myself, and I wasn't stopping until I did. Katie's retreat upstairs left me alone in the kitchen, my thoughts spiraling. Her tears, her trembling hands, her refusal to answer. It all felt too deliberate, too rehearsed. She was hiding something, and I was done waiting for her to come clean. I sat at the kitchen table, the faint aroma of coffee lingering in the air as I pulled out my phone. If Katie wouldn't give me answers, maybe her actions would. I opened her social media accounts first, scrolling through her recent posts and tagged photos. But everything looked normal, too normal. The gym check-ins, the pictures with friends, the inspirational quotes about strength and perseverance. It all felt like a smokescreen. I switched to her call log, my pulse quickening as I scanned the numbers. One stood out, repeated over and over at odd hours. Unknown caller. The same number had shown up late at night, early in the morning, even during times when she was supposedly at the gym. Whoever it was, they weren't just a casual acquaintance. I copied the number and called Ethan, my younger brother and a tech whiz who thrived on solving puzzles. He answered on the second ring, his voice groggy. "Matt, it's barely 8. What's going on?" "I need your help," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "With what?" Ethan asked, instantly more alert. I hesitated for a moment before explaining everything. The fight with Katie, the man at the motel, her suspicious behavior. By the time I finished, Ethan was silent. "Damn," he said finally. "Yeah," I replied bitterly. "Damn. What do you want me to do?" Ethan asked. "I need you to trace a number," I said. "I think it's the guy she's been talking to." Ethan sighed. "You know this is a bad idea, right?" he said. "You might not like what you find." "I don't care," I said firmly. "I need to know." After a moment, Ethan agreed, promising to call back once he had something. As I ended the call, a mix of anger and dread settled over me. I wasn't just chasing answers anymore. I was chasing the truth. The rest of the morning was a blur. Katie stayed upstairs, her silence speaking volumes, while I combed through her emails and text messages, searching for any clue that might confirm my suspicions. And then I found it. A message buried in her deleted folder, sent late at night just a week ago. "Can't stop thinking about last time. When can we meet again?" The sender's name wasn't saved, just a number that matched the one Ethan was tracing. The words burned in my mind, each one a betrayal I couldn't ignore. Katie hadn't just been lying to me. She'd been seeing someone else. By the time Ethan called back, I was pacing the living room, my thoughts spiraling. "Got something," he said, his tone cautious. "Who is it?" I asked, gripping the phone tightly. "The number belongs to a guy named James Holloway," Ethan said. "I did some digging. He's a teacher at Liam's school." The room seemed to spin as his words sank in. "A teacher," I repeated, my voice trembling. "Yeah," Ethan said, "and not just any teacher. He's Liam's homeroom teacher." The revelation hit me like a freight train. If James was involved, this wasn't just about me. It was about my son. "Matt," Ethan said cautiously, "what are you going to do?" I didn't answer, my mind racing with possibilities. But one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let this slide. James Holloway. The name echoed in my mind like a taunt, each repetition stoking the fire in my chest. Liam's homeroom teacher. I couldn't wrap my head around it. How could someone who interacted with my son every day, someone entrusted with his education, be involved in this mess? The revelation was like fuel to my suspicions. Katie's late-night texts, her excuses, her increasingly distant behavior. It all pointed to him. But I needed proof. I called the school, my hand trembling as I dialed the number. When the receptionist answered, her voice polite and cheerful, I struggled to keep my tone steady. "Hi," I said. "This is Matthew Jensen, Liam Jensen's father." I was wondering if I could speak to his homeroom teacher, James Holloway. The receptionist hesitated. Mr. Holloway isn't available right now, she said. Is there something I can help you with? No, I said quickly. I just wanted to discuss some academic concerns. Can you tell me when he'll be in? Her answer was precise. He's scheduled for parent-teacher conferences tomorrow evening. Would you like me to schedule a time for you? I agreed, my mind already racing with plans. If James was involved with Katie, I'd confront him face to face. And if he wasn't, well, I crossed that bridge when I got to it. That evening, I tried to act normal, but the tension between Katie and me was impossible to ignore. She stayed quiet during dinner, her gaze fixed on her plate as Liam chattered about his day at school. Mr. Holloway says I'm getting better at reading, Liam said proudly, holding up a gold star sticker on his homework. The mention of James's name made my stomach twist, but I forced a smile. That's great, buddy, I said, ruffling his hair. Katie glanced at me, her expression unreadable. She knew something was off, and I had no intention of hiding it. After Liam went to bed, I cornered her in the living room. We need to talk, I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. Katie hesitated, then nodded, sitting on the edge of the couch. I want the truth, I said. About James Holloway. Her face paled, and for a moment, I thought she might confess. But then she shook her head, her voice trembling. What are you talking about? She asked. Don't play dumb, I snapped. I know you've been talking to him. I know about the late-night texts, the deleted emails. I know everything, Katie. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she looked away, her voice barely above a whisper. It's not what you think. Then tell me what it is, I demanded. Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like what I think it is. Katie's tears spilled over as she buried her face in her hands. I was lonely, she said, her voice muffled. I needed someone to talk to. Her words cut deep, but they weren't enough. Talking, I said bitterly. Is that all it was? She nodded, her sobs shaking her shoulders. I swear, Matthew, she said. It never went further than that. Her answer didn't bring comfort. If anything, it made my anger burn hotter. I don't believe you, I said coldly. Her head snapped up, her tear-streaked face filled with desperation. You have to, she pleaded. Please, Matthew. I made a mistake, but it wasn't what you think. I stared at her, my chest tight with conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted to believe her, but another part, the part that had been lied to and betrayed, knew better. You're right about one thing, I said finally. You made a mistake, and now you're going to deal with the consequences. Her sobs grew louder as I walked away, my resolve hardening with every step. Tomorrow, I confront James Holloway. In one way or another, I get the truth. The day of the parent-teacher conference arrived like a storm cloud, heavy and oppressive. Katie's pleading from the night before echoed in my mind, but it only strengthened my resolve. If she wouldn't tell me the truth, then James Holloway would. I spent the morning at work, going through the motions but unable to focus. By the time evening rolled around, my frustration had boiled over into cold determination. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about Liam, about protecting him from the fallout of whatever was happening between Katie and his teacher. The school was brightly lit when I arrived, the hallways bustling with parents and teachers exchanging polite smiles and warm handshakes. I clenched my fists, the normalcy of the scene making my anger burn hotter. How many of these people knew the truth? James's classroom was at the end of the hall, his name printed neatly on the door. I paused outside, taking a deep breath before stepping inside. He was seated at his desk, his posture relaxed as he scrolled through a tablet. When he looked up and saw me, his expression shifted, surprise, then something more guarded. Mr. Jensen, he said, standing and extending a hand. Please have a seat. I ignored his outstretched hand, my eyes narrowing. I'm not here for pleasantries, I said coldly. James hesitated, then gestured to a chair across from his desk. All right, he said carefully. What's on your mind? I sat, my hands resting on the edge of the desk as I leaned forward. You've been talking to my wife, I said bluntly. James's face didn't change, but I saw the flicker of recognition in his eyes. I talk to a lot of parents, he said calmly. It's part of the job. Cut the crap, I snapped. I know about the late-night texts. I know about the deleted emails. I know you've been meeting with her outside of school. James leaned back in his chair, his calm demeanor faltering for the first time. "Mr. Jensen," he said, his tone measured, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "Then explain it to me," I said sharply, "because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been crossing a line." For a moment, James said nothing, his gaze fixed on the desk. Then he sighed, his hands resting on the armrests of his chair. "I don't know what Katie's told you," he said carefully, "but whatever you think is happening, it's not." "Then why the secrecy?" I demanded. "Why the late-night messages? Why the lies?" James hesitated, his jaw tightening. "Look," he said finally, "Katie's been struggling. She came to me for advice about Liam, about how to handle some challenges at home. That's it." I stared at him, my chest tight with anger and disbelief. "You expect me to believe that?" I asked bitterly. James's gaze hardened, his calm demeanor giving way to quiet frustration. "I don't care what you believe," he said evenly. "I'm telling you the truth." His words hit like a slap, but they weren't enough to extinguish the fire burning inside me. "I'm not done," I said, standing abruptly. James looked up at me, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Jensen," he said, his tone firm, "this isn't the place for this conversation." I ignored him, my fists clenching at my sides. "I'll find out the truth," I said, my voice low and cold. "And when I do, you'll wish you'd been honest with me." I left the classroom without another word, my heart pounding as I made my way down the hallway. The encounter had left me with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear. James Holloway was hiding something. The drive home from the school was tense, the streetlights blurring into streaks as my mind raced. James Holloway's calm, calculated responses had only fueled my suspicions. The way he hesitated, the careful choice of words, it was all too practiced. He was hiding something. When I got home, the house was quiet. Katie was in the kitchen, her back to me as she washed dishes. She didn't turn around when I entered, but her shoulders stiffened, a subtle sign that she knew I was there. "How was the meeting?" she asked softly, her voice laced with something I couldn't place. I stared at her, my chest tight with anger and frustration. "It was enlightening," I said evenly. Katie set the dish she was washing on the counter, her hands trembling slightly. "Matthew," she said, turning to face me. Her eyes were red, as if she'd been crying, but the guilt in her gaze cut deeper than any tears could. "Don't," I said sharply, holding up a hand. "Don't lie to me again." She flinched, her lips pressing into a thin line as she looked away. For a moment, the silence between us was deafening. Then she spoke, her voice trembling. "What do you want me to say?" "The truth," I said firmly. "About you and James." Katie's eyes filled with tears, but she shook her head. "There's nothing to tell," she said softly. Her denial only fueled my anger. "Stop lying," I shouted, my voice echoing through the house. "Stop pretending everything's fine when it's not." Katie's tears spilled over, her voice breaking as she replied. "Matthew, please," she said. "I'm trying to protect you." Her words stopped me cold. "Protect me?" I repeated bitterly. "From what?" "The truth." Katie shook her head, her tears falling freely now. "You don't understand," she said. "I didn't want this to happen. I didn't want any of this." Her words sent a chill down my spine, but they weren't enough. "Then tell me what's really going on," I said, my voice low and trembling. "Because I'm done playing games, Katie." For a moment, she said nothing, her silence louder than any confession. Then she turned away, her shoulders shaking as she sobbed. "I can't," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Her refusal felt like a slap, the weight of her secrets pressing down on me like a stone. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the kitchen, my mind racing. If Katie wouldn't give me answers, I'd have to find them myself. I called Ethan as soon as I was outside, the cool night air biting at my skin. "Matt," he said when he answered. "Tell me you've got something," I said, my voice sharp. Ethan sighed, his tone cautious. "I've been digging into James," he said. "And he's clean," Ethan said reluctantly. "No prayers, no study dealings. Just a boring, underpaid teacher." His answer made my stomach drop, the certainty I'd felt earlier slipping through my fingers. "Keep looking," I said firmly. "There's something there." "I know it." Ethan hesitated, then agreed. "I'll see what I can do," he said. I ended the call, my chest tight with frustration and doubt. If James wasn't the answer, then who or what was? The question haunted me as I sat in the dark, the pieces of the puzzle swirling in my mind but refusing to come together. I was running out of leads, but I wasn't running out of resolve. The next morning, I woke with a renewed sense of purpose, though the ache in my chest remained. Katie's tears, her cryptic words, "I'm trying to protect you," they echoed in my mind like a haunting refrain. She was hiding something, and if it wasn't about James, then the truth was something far worse. After dropping Liam off at school, I drove aimlessly through town, my thoughts spiraling. Ethan's research had come up empty on James Holloway, but that didn't mean the trail was cold. It just meant I had to dig deeper. I parked outside a coffee shop, grabbing a corner table where I could think clearly. As I sipped my coffee, I opened my laptop and began retracing my steps, poring over every detail I'd uncovered about Katie's recent behavior. Her gym check-ins, the mysterious late-night messages, the shifts in her demeanor that seemed to coincide with Liam's school events. It all pointed to something, or someone, I hadn't uncovered yet. My phone buzzed, pulling me from my thoughts. It was Ethan. "I've got something," he said when I answered, his tone cautious. "What is it?" I asked, leaning forward. "Remember how I said James's record was clean?" Ethan asked. "Yeah," I said impatiently. "Well, I dug into his connections," Ethan continued. "There's someone he's been working with on school projects, a colleague who seems to pop up a lot in his schedule." "Who?" I asked, my heart pounding. Ethan hesitated. "Someone named Peter Callahan," he said finally. "Teaches gym. Does a lot of after-school programs." My stomach twisted. Peter Callahan wasn't just a teacher. He was someone Katie had mentioned before, casually, in passing, as part of the school sports committee. "Why does that matter?" I asked, though my voice trembled with anticipation. "Because," Ethan said, "he's got a bit of a reputation. Nothing criminal, but let's just say he's been known to cross boundaries with parents." His words sent a chill through me. Could Peter be the one Katie had been meeting? "I'll send you everything I've got," Ethan said. "Check your email." After ending the call, I opened my email, scanning the documents Ethan had forwarded. There wasn't much, just a handful of staff photos, a few parent reviews that hinted at inappropriate familiarity, and Peter's professional history. But one thing stood out. A photo of Peter at a school fundraiser, standing beside Katie. Her smile in the photo wasn't just polite. It was warm. My chest tightened as I stared at the image. Was this the connection I'd been missing? I closed my laptop and left the coffee shop, my mind racing with possibilities. If Peter Callahan was involved, I needed to find out how. I drove straight to the school, parking in the visitor's lot, and making my way inside. The hallways were bustling with students, but my focus was singular. Peter's office was near the gymnasium, a small space filled with sports equipment and awards. When I arrived, the door was open, and Peter was sitting at his desk, reviewing what looked like game schedules. He looked up as I approached, his expression friendly but guarded. "Mr. Jensen," he said, standing and extending a hand. "What can I do for you?" I ignored his hand, my eyes narrowing. "We need to talk," I said firmly. Peter hesitated, then gestured to the chair across from his desk. "All right," he said. "Have a seat." I remained standing, my voice low but sharp. "This isn't about school," I said. "It's about my wife." Peter's expression faltered, a flicker of something. Recognition? Guilt? Crossing his face. "Your wife," he repeated carefully. "Katie." For a moment, the room was silent, the tension palpable. Then Peter sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I think I know what this is about," he said. My heart pounded as I took a step closer. "Then start talking," I said. Peter hesitated, his calm demeanor cracking. "Look," he said finally, "Katie's a great person. She's been involved in a lot of school events, and we've worked together on a few things. That's all." His words were smooth, practiced, but they didn't ease the storm brewing inside me. "And the late-night messages?" I pressed. "The meetings outside of school? Are those part of your projects too?" Peter's jaw tightened, and for a moment he said nothing. Then he leaned forward, his voice low. "Mr. Jensen," he said, "whatever's going on between you and Katie, I'm not involved." His denial felt hollow, but the intensity in his gaze made me pause. Was he telling the truth? Or was he just better at lying than I'd expected? Before I could respond, a voice behind me cut through the tension. "Matthew." I turned to see Katie standing in the hallway, her expression pale, and filled with a mix of shock and fear. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice trembling. Her sudden appearance sent a chill down my spine. What was she doing here? And why now? Katie's voice stopped me cold. The sound of her saying my name in that familiar, trembling tone brought a wave of emotions. Anger, betrayal, confusion. I turned slowly to face her, her figure framed in the hallway, the fluorescent lights casting stark shadows on her face. She looked panicked, like someone caught red-handed but unsure how much had been seen. "What are you doing here?" she repeated, her voice unsteady. The question felt like a slap. "I think that's my line," I said, my tone sharp. "What are you doing here, Katie? And how long have you been standing there?" Her eyes darted to Peter, who stood behind his desk, his posture stiff but his face unreadable. Katie's gaze lingered on him for a fraction too long, and the knot in my stomach tightened. "I came to pick up Liam's permission slip for the field trip," she said quickly, her voice trembling slightly. "A permission slip?" Her excuse felt as flimsy as the paper it was printed on. "You could have asked Liam to bring it home," I said, crossing my arms. Why the sudden need for a personal visit? Katie glanced at Peter again, her hesitation filling the room like a thick fog. I wanted to make sure everything was in order," she said finally. Her words were too careful, too rehearsed, and they did nothing to ease the growing suspicion in my chest. Peter cleared his throat, breaking the tension. "Katie, I think it's best if we give Mr. Jensen some space," he said, his tone calm but firm. Her eyes widened, her panic morphing into something closer to fear. "No," she said quickly. "This is my husband. If he has questions, I'll answer them." For a brief moment, I saw a flash of resolve in her eyes, and it caught me off guard. But it wasn't enough to calm the storm inside me. "Then answer this," I said, stepping closer. "What's going on between you two?" Katie flinched, her lips parting as if to deny it, but she hesitated. Peter stepped in before she could speak. "Nothing is going on," he said firmly. "Katie and I have worked together on school projects, and that's the extent of it." I turned to him, my anger boiling over. "Then why the secrecy?" I snapped. "Why the late-night texts, the meetings, the lies?" Peter held my gaze, his expression calm but strained. "Because sometimes people take things the wrong way," he said evenly. "And clearly, that's what's happening here." His patronizing tone was like gasoline on a fire. I took a step closer, my fists clenching at my sides. "Don't talk down to me," I said through gritted teeth. "If there's nothing to hide, then why does Katie look like she's about to collapse?" Katie's voice broke through the rising tension. "Matthew, stop," she said, her voice trembling. "Please, just stop." I turned to her, my chest tight with a mix of anger and pain. "Then tell me the truth," I said, my voice breaking. "Because I can't do this anymore, Katie. I can't keep chasing ghosts while you stand there pretending everything's fine." Tears filled her eyes, and she took a step toward me, her hands trembling. "I'm not pretending," she said softly. I don't know how to explain it." Her words sent a chill through me, but they weren't enough. "Try," I said, my tone sharp. "Because right now, I'm this close to walking away for good." Peter shifted uncomfortably behind his desk, his gaze darting between us. "I think we should all take a breath," he said cautiously. "Stay out of this." I snapped, not taking my eyes off Katie. "This is between me and my wife." Katie wiped her tears, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's nothing between us," she said, glancing briefly at Peter. "Not like that. I swear, Matthew." Her denial only added to my confusion. If it wasn't Peter, then who was it? And why was she so defensive? Before I could respond, Peter spoke again, his tone more assertive. "I think you've made your point, Mr. Jensen," he said. "And I think it's time you left." I turned to him, my anger reigniting. "You don't get to tell me what to do," I said coldly. "This is my family we're talking about." Peter's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Katie stepped between us, her hands on my chest as she pushed me back gently. "Matthew, please," she said, her voice breaking. "Let's just go home. We'll talk there. I promise." Her tears and trembling voice chipped away at my resolve, and I took a step back, my heart pounding. "Fine," I said finally. "But this isn't over, Katie. Not by a long shot." She nodded, her tears spilling over as she glanced at Peter one last time. Then she took my hand, and we walked out of the office, leaving him standing alone in the fluorescent-lit room. The drive home was silent, the tension between us thick and suffocating. Katie stared out the window, her face streaked with tears, while I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my mind racing. The pieces of the puzzle weren't fitting together, but I was getting closer to the truth, and I wasn't stopping until I had it. The drive home felt endless. Katie sat in the passenger seat, her body angled away from me as she stared out the window. The tension between us was suffocating, every unspoken word hanging heavy in the air. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, my chest tight with anger and confusion. When we pulled into the driveway, Katie hesitated before stepping out of the car. She lingered by the passenger door, her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to shield herself from the weight of what had just happened. I slammed the driver's door shut and walked up to the house, unlocking it without waiting for her. She followed a moment later, her footsteps hesitant behind me. Inside, I turned to face her, my chest tight with the questions that had been clawing at me for weeks. "Sit down," I said, my tone firm but restrained. Katie hesitated, then sank onto the couch, her hands trembling in her lap. I remained standing, my arms crossed as I stared down at her. "I'm done playing games, Katie," I said. "I need the truth. Now." Her eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head, her voice trembling. "I told you, Matthew," she said softly. "There's nothing going on." I scoffed, the sound bitter and sharp. "Don't insult me," I snapped. "I've been chasing shadows for weeks, messages, meetings, lies. And now, today, you just happen to show up at Peter's office while I'm confronting him?" Her tears spilled over, her voice breaking. "It's not what you think," she said. "Then tell me what it is," I demanded. Katie buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking as she sobbed. "I can't," she said finally, her voice muffled. Her refusal felt like a slap, the weight of her secrets pressing down on me like a stone. "You can't," I repeated bitterly. "Or you won't." She looked up at me, her tear-streaked face filled with a mix of guilt and desperation. "Matthew," she said softly, "please just let it go." Her plea ignited something in me, a fire I could no longer control. "Let it go," I shouted, my voice echoing through the room. "You want me to let it go while you keep lying to my face? While you keep sneaking around behind my back?" Katie flinched, her sobs growing louder as she shook her head. "I'm not sneaking around," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm trying to protect you." Her words sent a chill through me, freezing me in place. "Protect me?" I repeated, my voice low. "From what?" Katie hesitated, her gaze dropping to her lap as fresh tears spilled over. "From yourself," she said finally, her voice breaking. The room fell silent, her words hanging between us like a challenge. "Explain," I said, my tone cold and sharp. Katie looked up at me, her expression filled with both love and fear. "Matthew," she said softly, "you've been so angry, so hurt. I didn't know how to talk to you anymore. I didn't know how to fix what's broken." Her words hit like a punch to the gut, the weight of them settling over me like a heavy fog. "So what?" I asked bitterly. "You ran to Peter? To James? To whoever else was willing to listen?" Katie shook her head, fresh tears spilling over. "It wasn't like that," she said. I needed someone to talk to. Someone who wasn't already broken, like me." Her confession cut deep, and for a moment, I struggled to find a response. "Broken?" I said finally, my voice trembling. "That's how you see me?" Katie's tears fell harder, and she buried her face in her hands. "No," she said softly. "That's how I see us." Her words left me speechless, the anger inside me giving way to a deep, aching sadness. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why didn't you let me help you?" Katie looked up at me, her expression filled with guilt and regret. "Because I didn't know how," she said softly. For a moment, the room was silent, the weight of her confession pressing down on both of us. Then, finally, I sat beside her, my anger melting into something more fragile. "We can't fix this if you keep shutting me out," I said, my voice trembling. "I'm here, Katie, but I can't keep fighting for someone who won't fight for me." Katie's tears spilled over as she reached for my hand, her grip tight, but trembling. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I'm so sorry, Matthew." Her apology felt like a small crack of light breaking through the darkness, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. The truth was still out there, hidden beneath layers of guilt and secrecy. And I wasn't stopping until I uncovered it all. Katie's apology lingered in the air between us, her words trembling with sincerity, but failing to soothe the storm raging inside me. Her tears were real, her regret palpable, but they weren't answers. They weren't the truth I desperately needed. I pulled my hand away, the sudden movement making her flinch. "This isn't enough, Katie," I said, my voice low but firm. "An apology won't fix this. Not without the truth." Her tears fell harder, and she shook her head, her voice trembling. "I've told you everything I can," she said softly. "Please, Matthew, can't we just start over? Can't we move past this?" Her plea felt like a knife to the chest. "Move past what?" I asked bitterly. "You won't even admit what you've done. How am I supposed to move past something you won't acknowledge?" Katie buried her face in her hands, her sobs shaking her shoulders. "I don't know how to fix this," she said, her voice muffled. For a moment, I just stared at her, my heart heavy with a mix of anger, pain, and something I couldn't quite name. She looked small, vulnerable, like a child caught in a storm too big for her to handle. But her vulnerability didn't excuse the lies. I stood abruptly, my chest tight as I paced the room. "Then I'll fix it," I said finally, my voice trembling with resolve. "I'll find out the truth myself. And when I do, you won't have a choice but to face it." Katie looked up sharply, her tear-streaked face filled with panic. "Matthew, no," she said quickly. "Please, just leave it alone." Her desperation sent a chill down my spine. "What are you so afraid of?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. "What's so terrible that you'd rather let our marriage fall apart than admit it to me?" Her silence spoke louder than any confession. Without another word, I grabbed my keys and walked out of the house, her sobs echoing behind me. The cool night air hit me like a slap as I sat in the car, my hands trembling as I gripped the steering wheel. Katie's tears, her desperate plea, they were cracks in her armor, but they weren't enough to break through. I needed answers, and if she wouldn't give them to me, I'd find them elsewhere. I called Ethan, his voice groggy when he answered. "Matt," he said, yawning. "What now?" "I need you to dig deeper," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "On who?" Ethan asked, his tone cautious. "Everyone," I said firmly. "James, Peter, anyone Katie's been in contact with. There's something she's not telling me, and I need to know what it is." Ethan sighed, but he didn't argue. "All right," he said. "I'll see what I can do." After ending the call, I drove aimlessly, my thoughts spiraling as I tried to piece together the fragments of truth I'd uncovered. Katie's guilt was undeniable, but the target of her betrayal remained elusive. Was it James? Peter? Someone else entirely? Every possibility churned in my stomach like acid, the uncertainty eating away at me. But I wouldn't stop, not until I had the full story. Hours later, Ethan called back, his tone hesitant. "I've got something," he said. "Tell me," I said, my heart pounding. "It's not James," Ethan said. "And it's not Peter either. At least, not directly." His words sent a chill through me. "Then who is it?" I asked, my voice trembling. Ethan hesitated, the silence on the line stretching unbearably. "Matt," he said finally, "I think it's someone closer to home." The room seemed to spin as his words sank in, my breath catching in my throat. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know for sure," Ethan said, "but there's a pattern in the messages. The timestamps, the locations, they don't match up with James or Peter. They match someone who's been around you both." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. Someone close to us. Someone I hadn't even considered. I ended the call without responding, my chest tight as I sat in the dark, the pieces of the puzzle swirling in my mind but refusing to fit. Who was Katie protecting? And why? Ethan's words replayed in my mind like a haunting refrain. Someone closer to home. The possibilities churned in my gut, each one more damning than the last. Who could it be? A neighbor? A coworker? Someone I trusted implicitly? The thought sent a chill through me. If Katie's betrayal involved someone within our circle, then this wasn't just about infidelity. It was a betrayal of everything we'd built together. I parked outside a gas station, the cool night air swirling around me as I leaned against the car, my chest tight. My phone buzzed again, pulling me from my thoughts. It was Ethan. "I've got more," he said when I answered, his tone cautious. "What is it?" I asked, my heart pounding. Ethan hesitated, the silence stretching unbearably. It's not definitive, he said carefully. But there's one name that keeps popping up. My stomach twisted as I braced myself for his answer. Who? I asked, my voice trembling. Ryan, Ethan said finally. Your son's baseball coach. The world seemed to tilt, my breath catching in my throat. Ryan? The man I'd spent weekends chatting with on the sidelines. The man who'd come to our family barbecues. The man Liam idolized? Are you sure? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I can't say for certain, Ethan admitted. But the patterns line up. He's been in contact with Katie more often than makes sense, and the timestamps match the nights you've had suspicions. The revelation sent a wave of nausea through me. If Ryan was involved, then Katie's lies weren't just about protecting herself. They were about protecting someone she'd brought into our family's life. I'm going to find out, I said, my voice cold and firm. Matt, Ethan started, but I ended the call before he could finish. I drove straight to Ryan's house, my mind racing with anger and dread. The quiet suburban street felt like a mockery of the storm brewing inside me. When I pulled up outside his house, the lights were still on, a faint glow spilling onto the neatly trimmed lawn. I stepped out of the car, my fists clenched as I approached the door. Before I could knock, the door opened, and Ryan stood there, his expression shifting from surprise to something more guarded. Matt, he said, his tone cautious. This is unexpected. Can we talk? I said, my voice tight. Ryan hesitated, then nodded, stepping aside to let me in. The house was tidy, almost sterile, with faintly framed family photos on the walls. It was the kind of place that didn't give anything away. What's this about? Ryan asked, his tone measured as he gestured for me to sit. I remained standing, my eyes fixed on him. You know what it's about, I said sharply. Ryan's expression faltered, a flicker of unease crossing his face. I'm not sure I do, he said carefully. Then let me spell it out for you, I said, stepping closer. It's about Katie. His reaction was subtle, a slight widening of his eyes, a tightening of his jaw, but it was enough. I don't know what you're talking about, Ryan said quickly, his voice a little too calm. Don't lie to me, I snapped. I've been chasing shadows for weeks, and they all lead back to you. So start talking, Ryan, before I lose my patience. Ryan hesitated, his gaze darting to the floor. Matt, he said finally, his voice low. I think you're making a mistake. A mistake? I repeated bitterly. You think all the late-night messages, the meetings, the lies, they're just coincidences? Ryan sighed, running a hand through his hair as he looked away. It's not what you think, he said softly. Then what is it? I demanded. Ryan hesitated, his hands clenching at his sides. It's complicated, he said finally. His words sent a chill through me, my anger bubbling over. Complicated? I repeated, my voice rising. You've been sneaking around with my wife, and you call that complicated? Ryan flinched, his calm demeanor cracking. Matt, listen. Save it, I said coldly. I'm done listening to lies. Before he could respond, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, my heart skipping a beat when I saw Katie's name. For a moment, I hesitated, torn between confronting Ryan and answering the call. Then I swiped to answer, my voice sharp as I spoke. What? Matthew, Katie said, her voice trembling. Please come home. I need to tell you something. Her words sent a wave of dread through me, her tone filled with something I couldn't place. Fear, desperation, or perhaps both. I'll be there soon, I said, ending the call before she could reply. I turned back to Ryan, my anger simmering just beneath the surface. This isn't over, I said coldly. Ryan said nothing, his gaze dropping to the floor as I walked out, the weight of his silence following me into the night. The drive home was oppressive, the weight of unanswered questions pressing down on me like a vice. Katie's trembling voice on the phone replayed in my mind, her desperation palpable. What was she so afraid to say? And why now? When I pulled into the driveway, the house loomed in the darkness, the porch light casting eerie shadows across the lawn. Katie was waiting inside, pacing the living room with her arms wrapped around herself. The moment I stepped through the door, she stopped, her eyes wide and glistening with tears. Matthew, she said softly, her voice trembling. I'm glad you came back. Her words hit me like a sucker punch, but I didn't let them soften the anger boiling inside me. Start talking, I said, my tone sharp. No more excuses. No more tears. Just tell me the truth, Katie. Now. She flinched, her hands wringing together as she struggled to speak. I've been lying to you, she admitted, her voice breaking. But it's not what you think. I laughed bitterly, the sound cutting through the room like a blade. It never is, I said. First it was nothing, then it was James, then Peter. And now, apparently, it's Ryan. So which one is it, Katie? Or are there more? Her tears spilled over, and she shook her head, her sobs shaking her shoulders. Please, she said, her voice breaking. Please, just let me explain. I crossed my arms, my chest tight with anger and anticipation. I'm waiting, I said coldly. Katie wiped her tears, her voice trembling as she spoke. It started months ago, she said. I felt like I was losing myself, like I wasn't enough for you or for Liam. And Ryan, he listened. He made me feel seen. Her words sent a chill through me, but they weren't enough. Seen? I repeated bitterly. That's your excuse? Katie shook her head, her tears falling harder. It wasn't supposed to go this far, she said. I never meant to hurt you. Her confession left me reeling, my thoughts spiraling as the pieces began to fall into place. So, it is Ryan, I said, my voice trembling. He's the one you've been sneaking around with. Katie's silence was damning, her tearful gaze dropping to the floor. The anger inside me boiled over, my fists clenching at my sides. Do you have any idea what you've done? I snapped. You didn't just betray me. You betrayed Liam. You brought him into our lives, into our home, and now this. Katie's sobs grew louder, her body trembling as she sank onto the couch. I'm so sorry, she said, her voice breaking. I didn't know how to stop it. Her apology felt hollow, like a whisper in a storm. I turned away, my chest tight as I struggled to process her words. The truth was finally out, but it didn't bring the closure I'd hoped for. If anything, it left me feeling more lost than ever. I turned back to Katie, my voice low but firm. This is over, I said. You end it with him, and you figure out what you want. Because I can't keep living like this, Katie. I won't. Her tear-streaked face filled with panic, and she reached for my hand. Matthew, please, she said, her voice trembling. Don't leave. Don't give up on us. Her plea cut deep, the love in her eyes clashing with the betrayal in my heart. For a moment, I hesitated, torn between the life we'd built and the cracks that had split it apart. I don't know if there's an us to save, I said finally, my voice breaking. But if you want there to be, you'd better start proving it. Because this is your last chance, Katie. Her sobs filled the room as I walked away, the weight of her confession pressing down on me like a stone. The truth was out, but the damage was already done. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. Katie hadn't come to bed after our confrontation, and when I walked into the living room, I found her curled up on the couch, still wearing yesterday's clothes. Her face was pale, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She looked up as I entered, her gaze filled with desperation and something else, fear. Good morning, she said softly, her voice trembling. I didn't respond, moving past her to the kitchen to make coffee. The sound of the machine filling the silence between us felt louder than it should have. Matthew, Katie said, her voice barely above a whisper. Please, can we talk? I turned to face her, leaning against the counter as I crossed my arms. Talk about what? I said coldly. You made your choices, Katie. Now you get to live with them. Her face crumpled, fresh tears spilling over as she buried her face in her hands. I don't know how to fix this, she sobbed, but I'll do whatever it takes. Just tell me what to do. Her plea sent a wave of conflicting emotions through me, anger, sadness, and a faint glimmer of hope. But hope felt dangerous now, like a trap I couldn't afford to fall into. I don't have the answers, I said finally, my voice heavy. That's something you're going to have to figure out on your own. Katie nodded, her sobs growing quieter as she wiped her tears. Do you still love me? She asked, her voice trembling. The question hit me like a punch to the gut. Did I still love her? The answer was complicated, tangled in layers of betrayal and heartbreak. I don't know, I said honestly, my voice breaking. I want to, but I don't know if I can. Katie's tears fell harder, her body trembling as she sank back onto the couch. After a long silence, I spoke again, my voice steadier this time. If you're serious about fixing this, then you need to take responsibility, I said. No more lies. No more running. Just the truth. Katie nodded, her gaze filled with determination through her tears. I promise, she said softly. I'll do whatever it takes, Matthew. I won't give up on us. Her words were earnest, but they didn't erase the pain. Promises were easy to make. Keeping them was another story. I left the house shortly after, the weight of our conversation pressing down on me like a storm cloud. I drove aimlessly, my thoughts swirling with memories of better times, before the lies, before the cracks in our marriage had turned into chasms. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to believe in the possibility of healing. But another part, the part still reeling from her betrayal, wasn't sure if forgiveness was enough. I pulled into a park, the crisp morning air biting at my skin as I sat on a bench, staring at the trees swaying in the wind. The serenity of the scene felt like a cruel joke, a stark contrast to the chaos inside me. My phone buzzed, pulling me from my thoughts. It was Ethan. Matt, he said when I answered, his tone cautious. I found something else. What now? I asked, my chest tightening. It's about Ryan, Ethan said. There's more to the story than what Katie told you. The knot in my stomach tightened. What do you mean? I asked, my voice low. Ryan's been talking to someone else, Ethan said. Someone connected to Katie. His words sent a chill through me, my heart pounding as the pieces began to shift again. Who? I asked, my voice trembling. Ethan hesitated, then spoke carefully. James Holloway. The revelation hit me like a freight train, my breath catching in my throat. James, the man I'd been so certain was involved, was connected to Ryan after all. What does it mean? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm not sure yet, Ethan admitted. But it's not a coincidence. There's something bigger going on, Matt. You just need to find it. His words reignited the fire in my chest, the anger and determination burning hotter than ever. Katie's betrayal was just the tip of the iceberg. There was more to this story, and I wasn't stopping until I uncovered it all. Ethan's revelation about Ryan and James hit me like a sledgehammer. The betrayal I thought I was piecing together wasn't just tangled, it was calculated. There was a connection between these two men, a reason their names kept surfacing in the wreckage of my marriage. And I wasn't going to rest until I found out what it was. The drive home felt surreal. Katie's tearful promises replayed in my mind, but now they felt hollow, weighed down by this new discovery. Was she lying to protect herself? Or was she being manipulated, caught in a trap she hadn't seen coming? When I walked into the house, Katie was still on the couch, her face pale and her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked up as I entered, her gaze filled with cautious hope. Matthew, she said softly, did you go for a walk? Her question, so simple and normal, made my stomach twist. How could she act like this when everything between us was breaking apart? No, I said sharply, my tone making her flinch. I was getting answers. Katie's eyes widened, and her body tensed. What do you mean? She asked, her voice trembling. I sat across from her, leaning forward as I fixed her with a cold, steady gaze. Ryan, I said, you told me it was him, that he listened, that he made you feel seen. Katie's lips parted as if to respond, but no words came out. But here's the thing, I continued, my voice low and cutting. Ryan's been talking to someone else, someone you've also been keeping secrets about. James. Katie's face crumpled, her tears spilling over as she shook her head. No, she said quickly, her voice breaking. It's not what you think. Please, Matthew, you have to believe me. Then make me believe you. I snapped. Because right now, all I see is someone who's been lying to me for months, protecting men who had no business being in our lives. Katie buried her face in her hands, her sobs shaking her shoulders. I didn't know, she said, her voice muffled. I didn't know they were connected. Her words sent a chill through me, my anger clashing with the faint glimmer of doubt creeping into my mind. What are you talking about? I demanded. Katie looked up, her tear-streaked face filled with desperation. Ryan wasn't just listening to me, she said, her voice trembling. He asked questions. About you. About us. I thought it was innocent at first, but then her voice broke, and she shook her head, her hands trembling in her lap. Then what? I pressed my chest tight. Then he started suggesting things, she said softly. That maybe you didn't care anymore. That maybe I deserved better. Her confession hit like a punch to the gut, but she wasn't done. And James, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. He, he encouraged me to keep talking to Ryan. He said it would help me sort through my feelings. I thought they were just trying to help, but now I don't know. Her voice trailed off, her tears falling harder as she buried her face in her hands again. The pieces were falling into place, each one revealing a darker, more insidious picture. Ryan and James weren't just bystanders in this mess. They were orchestrators, pushing Katie further into doubt and betrayal while keeping me in the dark. I stood abruptly, pacing the room as my thoughts raced. They were manipulating you, I said, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. Both of them. Katie nodded, her sobs muffled as she clutched her knees. I didn't see it, she said. I swear, Matthew, I didn't see it until it was too late. Her admission didn't erase the pain, but it shifted the target of my anger. Ryan and James had crossed a line, using Katie's vulnerability to fracture our marriage and turn us against each other. But I wasn't going to let them win. I knelt in front of Katie, taking her trembling hands in mine. Listen to me, I said firmly, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. This ends now. No more lies, no more games. We face this together, or not at all. Katie looked up at me, her tear-filled eyes filled with both fear and hope. I want to fix this, she said softly. I'll do whatever it takes. Her words were earnest, but they weren't enough. Then start by telling me everything, I said. Every conversation, every meeting, every text. I need to know exactly what they've done. Katie nodded, her tears spilling over as she began to speak, her words a painful unraveling of months of manipulation and deceit. By the time she finished, the weight of her story pressed down on both of us like a storm cloud. The truth was darker than I'd imagined, but it brought with it a renewed determination. Ryan and James had tried to destroy us. Now it was my turn to destroy them. Katie's tearful confession was a tidal wave of betrayal, manipulation, and calculated deceit. Ryan and James hadn't just preyed on her vulnerability. They had orchestrated a campaign to fracture our marriage, to make her doubt everything we'd built together. Now it was time to confront them. Katie hesitated as I reached for my keys, her voice trembling. Matthew, she said softly, her eyes wide with fear. What are you going to do? I'm going to end this, I said, my tone sharp and resolute. Her hand reached for mine, her grip trembling but firm. Please, she said, be careful. They're not who you think they are. Her warning sent a chill through me, but I didn't let it show. I nodded curtly, then stepped outside, the crisp night air biting at my skin as I climbed into the car. The drive to Ryan's house felt surreal, the headlights cutting through the darkness like a blade. My chest was tight with anger and anticipation, each breath a reminder of the confrontation to come. When I arrived, the house was dark, but a single light glowed in the living room window. I parked across the street, my hands trembling as I gripped the steering wheel. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about Katie, about Liam, about taking back control of our lives. I crossed the lawn and knocked on the door, the sound echoing in the quiet night. A moment later, Ryan appeared, his expression shifting from surprise to guardedness the moment he saw me. Matt, he said, his tone cautious. This is unexpected. Can we talk? I said, my voice steady but cold. Ryan hesitated, then stepped aside, gesturing for me to enter. The living room was sparsely decorated, the faint hum of a ceiling fan filling the silence as I stood in the center of the room. What's this about? Ryan asked, his tone measured. I turned to face him, my fists clenching at my sides. You know exactly what this is about, I said sharply. It's about Katie, about the lies, the manipulation, the games you've been playing behind my back. Ryan's expression faltered, a flicker of unease crossing his face. Matt, he said carefully, I think you're misunderstanding. Save it. I snapped, cutting him off. I know what you've been doing. You and James. You've been feeding her doubts, making her question everything, pushing her further away from me. Ryan's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. You thought I wouldn't find out. I continued, my voice rising. You thought I'd just sit back and let you destroy my family? Matt, Ryan said, his tone firm but cautious. This isn't what you think. James and I were trying to help her. Help her? I repeated bitterly. By turning her against me? By making her feel like she wasn't enough? Ryan sighed, running a hand through his hair as he leaned against the wall. "She came to us, Matt," he said. "She was struggling, and we gave her a space to talk about it. That's all." "Bullshit," I snapped, stepping closer. "You didn't just listen. You manipulated her. You used her vulnerability to drive a wedge between us." "Why?" For a moment, Ryan said nothing, his gaze dropping to the floor. Then he looked up, his expression hardening. "Because she deserved better," he said evenly. His words hit me like a punch to the gut, the anger inside me boiling over. "You don't get to decide that," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "She's my wife. Not yours. Not James's. I mean it." Ryan flinched but didn't respond, his silence speaking volumes. "You think you could just walk into someone's life, tear it apart, and walk away?" I demanded, my fist clenching. "Not this time. Not with my family." Before Ryan could respond, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I hesitated, then pulled it out, my chest tightening when I saw Katie's name on the screen. "Matthew," she said when I answered, her voice trembling. "Please come home. I need you." Her plea was like a lifeline, pulling me back from the edge. I ended the call without responding, turning back to Ryan with a cold glare. "This isn't over," I said sharply. "You stay away from Katie. You stay away from Liam. And you stay the hell away from my family." Ryan didn't argue, his gaze dropping as I turned and walked out of the house, the weight of his silence following me into the night. The drive home was quiet, the anger inside me simmering but controlled. When I walked through the door, Katie was waiting, her tear-streaked face filled with relief as she rushed to me. "Matthew," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry." I took her hands in mine, my grip firm but gentle. "This is the last time, Katie," I said, my voice breaking. "No more lies. No more games. If we're going to fix this, it has to start now." Katie nodded, her tears spilling over as she clung to me. "I promise," she said, her voice breaking. "I'll do whatever it takes." Her words were earnest, but they weren't enough to erase the pain. It would take time, effort, and honesty to rebuild what had been broken. But for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. We weren't just starting over. We were fighting for something worth saving.